Rambam, we are. It's still in the book of purity. It's a very large book dealing with impurities, shar ovasatuma, which are the other types of impurities. Okay, so when a person immerses his head, chapter 9, and the majority of his body in drawn water, or through a lume of drawn water fall on his head, and the majority of his body, he is a second derivative of impurity until he immerses himself in a mikvah. So, person then is so a person this another water makes food when water is, let's say an apple was picked from the tree, right? Hold on one second. Kayla, I'm just teaching. Anything urgent? I'll call you back shortly, okay? Sorry. So if you pick an apple from a tree and you pour water on it, right? You put it under the sink to wash it, which is a good idea to do. It makes it now capable of becoming impure. When it's growing on the tree, it can't become impure. It's connected to the ground, right? It's connected to the tree. It's not. But once it's uprooted, once water comes upon it, it could become now impure. Impure just means that you can't eat that apple in the Holy Temple when you're going there for the holiday. You could eat it for a snack at home, but you can't eat it in a holy state, right? So a person also, if you pour water on yourself, that makes you also susceptible, right? And you would become a secondary derivative of impurity until you go to the mikvah. There's primary, there's a via voice, like a corpse itself is a primary form of unholiness, right? Then there is being a derivative, and then there's a second derivative. This is a second derivative you become, right? Which each one becomes less than what it can become. The more of it a derivative it is, the less it becomes a power of impurity. Okay, so you need to go to the mikvah, and then you become pure from this, right? If he touches foods, he causes them to become a third derivative. Tertiary, right? Third derivative of food, right? If he touches liquids, he imparts impurity to them, causing them to be considered as a primary derivative, a first level, even though he was only second level. And they impart impurity to other foods and liquids. They do not, however, impart impurity to vessels, to kalim. Why did the sages decree that such a person should be impure? Right? Why is it because you put, you poured water, a certain amount of water on you, right? You become impure. This is all rabbinic law, not biblical law. So he says because people would immerse in caves where the water was foul and then would wash from fresh water, drawn fresh water for the sake of cleanliness. So they would go to the mikvah. This is what they would do. They would go to the mikvah, right, in order to become pure. So often the mikvahs were found in caves where there was, but the water there was foul. It wasn't a good mikvah. So what would they do after going to mikvah? They would wash themselves. So they would be physically clean, right? Which that's a problem. This became such a widespread practice that the majority of people got the immersion from the drawn water in which the people would ultimately wash was an agent that conveyed ritual purity and not the immersion in the waters of the mikveh. Therefore, they would immerse themselves carelessly without attention to details. So what happened afterwards, people became careless about the mikveh and then, using water afterwards. And then they would be careless about how they would go, because if, let's say, you kept your pinky out of the mikveh, it's not an immersion. You have to be completely immersed, right? Just like the sukkah, you're completely under the schach of the sukkah. So here you have to be completely immersed. You can't keep a pinky out. But people weren't careful because to them the cleanliness was from the shower they took afterwards, or that they washed themselves with some water. So the people became careless. So therefore they said, that shower you're going to take afterwards, that's going to make you impure. To bring to light that be careful about going to the mikvah. Right? Accordingly, our sages decreed that when a person immerses his head in the majority of body in a drawn water, or 3 lugan of drawn water fall on his head in the majority of body, he becomes a secondary derivative of impurity. That's what they said. You become a second derivative. That's a rabbinic law. Because of the carelessness there was about when they went into a mikvah, that was, back in the day, mikvahs, not like today, they're kept very clean, filters and, whole different things that are done to keep a mikvah clean. Back in the day, it was a difficult thing. So, and it wasn't so much the problem of taking the shower afterwards. It was the problem is that the shower became the main thing, and the mikvah became something they were careless about. That was the problem, and that's what the sages wanted to prevent. So even when 3 lugim of drawn water falls on a head of the majority of the person, a body of a person who was pure, who did not immerse himself that day in the mikvah, or such a person immerses his head and a majority of the body in drawn water, he becomes a secondary derivative of impurity until he immerses himself. Even though he didn't even go to the mikvah, just by doing that now, they made a standard ruling. After a person who contracted impurity in such a manner immerses himself, he need not wait until nightfall to regain impurity. For the impurity contracted by the person is fundamentally a rabbinic decree. Usually when you have to go to the mikvah, it's not you go through the mikvah, but then nightfall is when you become completely pure. That's only biblical law. But since this is a rabbinic law, they said immediately when you go to the mikvah, you're pure, right? So you could go now eat that pure food that you wanted to eat, and and so on. If you're a kohen, for example, truma, right? Similarly, a person contracted impurity because he ate impure foods or drank impure liquids and then immersed himself, need not wait until nightfall to regain purity, right? Because that's also rabbinic law. So when the kalim become impure due to the contact of impure liquids, once they are immersed, they become pure. They need not wait until nightfall because these impurities are fundamentally rabbinic decrees. Okay, I would love to continue, but it's Erev Yontav and it's Erev Yontav. All right, Yontav, everybody. Chag Sameach.